Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Sydney, and if you're new here, this is just a place where we can talk about true crime, spooky scary stories, dark history, basically anything that I got going on in my brain. We sit down and we talk about it. So today we're going to be talking about the 1982 Tylenol poisonings, which is kind of an involved case, so let's get right into it. It was just a normal day in September of 1982 when 12-year-old Mary Kellerman woke up and she just was feeling a little bit under the weather. She went to the bathroom and popped a couple extra strength Tylenols to hopefully make her feel a little better, and she started to head back to her bedroom. Only a few moments later, however, Mary's father heard a very loud crash, and he ran up to the bathroom and found 12-year-old Mary on the floor unconscious. The paramedics were called to the scene, but unfortunately they couldn't do very much as Mary had gone into cardiac arrest, which is so scary, especially for a 12-year-old girl. The paramedics rushed her to the hospital, where she unfortunately passed away at about 10 a.m. that very same day. This was so heartbreaking for Mary's family and her friends, as Mary had been such a light in their lives. But this was only the beginning of a horrific 24 hours in Chicago, Illinois. About 7 miles away, and on that very same day, there was a man named Adam Janis who was a post office supervisor, and he was also staying home sick for the day. He was with his wife and his 2 children. He did feel okay enough to run some errands, so he stopped by the store to pick up a few things, including a bottle of extra strength Tylenol. At around lunchtime, Adam took a few of the Tylenol as he wasn't feeling really hot, and he almost immediately started complaining of chest pains, and soon he became unresponsive. The paramedics were called, but it was too late. Adam unfortunately passed away at the hospital at around 3 p.m. that day. Doctors believe that Adam had suffered from a massive heart attack, as nothing else made sense. Nothing else stood out to the doctors as being weird or unordinary that would have caused his death. The entire Janis family actually went to Adam's house just to start doing some light funeral planning and just to be together as a family. Adam's brother Stanley and his new wife Teresa were also there, and they were just kind of feeling crappy, so they took a few extra strength Tylenols from Adam's house, and you can probably see where this is going. Teresa and Stanley had just gotten married. The wedding was so recent that they didn't even have pictures back from the photographer yet, and according to everybody, they were just so in love. Both Stanley and Teresa almost immediately fell unconscious, and Adam's wife, having seen this just earlier in the day, immediately called 911 because the same thing that happened to her husband was now happening to her family as well. Paramedics rushed to the scene, and they were stunned to see that Stanley and Teresa were in very much the same condition that Adam had been in just hours earlier. Honestly, they were scared. They had no idea what was causing all of these deaths, and they thought, was it airborne? Was it something that they ingested? They were just completely stunned, and they didn't really know what to do. They ended up transporting everyone to the hospital. Like everybody that was in the house, they quarantined them because they just didn't know if it was airborne or not, and they couldn't take any chances. Unfortunately, a little while after Stanley and Teresa got to the hospital, Stanley passed away, and Teresa was put on life support, but she never regained consciousness. Mary Ridner was at home that day with her husband, her mother-in-law, and her children, and she actually had a 5-day-old newborn that she was taking care of as well. She was about to feed her baby, but first she decided to take an extra strength Tylenol for her headache. A few moments later, she collapsed on her living room floor, seizing. Unfortunately, we're starting to know this story well, and paramedics were called to the scene, but it was too late, and Mary died a day later. Mary McFarland was recently divorced, and she had 2 kids. She had actually just started dating too, and things were finally starting to look up for Mary. Mary was working her shift at the Illinois Bell Telephone Company when she slipped into the break room to take a few extra strength Tylenols. Apparently, the fluorescent lighting that they used in her building caused a lot of people to have headaches, so this was a very common occurrence. Mary went back onto the floor, but then quickly came back to the break room, complaining that she felt kind of dizzy and just bad. Almost instantaneously, she collapsed onto the floor and became unresponsive. Paramedics again were called, she was taken to the hospital, and she passed away. Paula Prince was a United Airlines flight attendant who had just landed in Chicago for the night. She had planned to possibly meet up with her friend Jean later that night because she had some great news to share with her. So she stopped by her local Walgreens to pick up a few things, including extra strength Tylenol, And there's actually video footage of her paying for the Tylenol at the counter. Paula arrived home, changed out of her work clothes, and started to take off her makeup, but paused briefly to take a few of the extra strength Tylenol. Unfortunately, her body was found by her sister and Jean about 2 days later. At Paula's funeral, a man came up to Jean and introduced himself. He then told her that he and Paula had fallen in love and that they had planned to get married. That was the exciting news that Paula had wanted to share with Jean that night, but she never got a chance to. It might seem kind of random that we're talking about all these different people and all their lives, but they're all connected by one thing, their deaths. And I think it's really unfortunate that this happened, but it's also important that we talk about their lives and how amazing and great that they were in their lives. I just wanted to talk a little bit about that because I feel like it's important that we recognize that these were real people with real families. So behind the scenes, a public health official named Helen Jensen actually went to the Janis's house to collect some evidence to try to figure out what had caused the deaths of the Janis family. She collected many different items, but the main thing that she was concerned about was the open bottle of Tylenol with 6 capsules missing. She had counted the pills and figured out that 3 people died, 6 capsules were missing. It just kind of made the most sense. But when she brought this to the attention of authorities, they kind of laughed in her face. They did not believe her. They were like, yeah, okay, like whatever. That can't be it, blah, blah, blah. I was actually reading through an interview that had Helen talking about this whole incident, and she said that she literally was so worked up. She was stomping her feet. She was yelling like, please pay attention. Like, this has to be it. And they still just didn't believe her. And evidently she went to bed that night crying, which, yeah, that makes sense. If you know that something's to blame and you know that this could cause more people's deaths and authorities aren't doing anything about it, yeah, that's frustrating. It's crazy. I'm surprised more people didn't die, actually. But paramedics and doctors were able to kind of narrow it down by talking to each other and figuring out that there was nothing else that could be to blame. So the bottle of Tylenol that Helen had collected from the Janis's house was given to the chief deputy medical examiner, and he wanted to just take a closer look at the pills for himself. Upon smelling the bottle of Tylenol, there was a slight bitter almond smell to it. It wasn't looking very good. Toxicologists obtained the bottle from the Janis's house, and to their horror, everyone's suspicions were confirmed. Someone had laced this bottle of Tylenol with potassium cyanide, and the amount that they had laced these pills with were 3 times the fatal amount of cyanide. This chemical works by preventing the body from getting and using the oxygen that it needs, and this results in cells dying in mass amounts. It can cause death just minutes or even seconds after ingestion. Additionally, the doctors tested both Stanley and Teresa's blood, and when the results came back, it was seen that they had massive amounts of potassium cyanide running through their bloodstream. It was confirmed that the Tylenol bottles had been laced with potassium cyanide. So at this time, Tylenol was the best-selling non-prescription pain reliever on the market. And this was because they had this gel-like capsule that made it easier to swallow than other pain relievers. Tylenol, which usually had about 35% of all sales for over-the-counter medication, dropped to just 8% within the month, because people had found out that Tylenol was causing all these random deaths within the Chicago area. McNeil Consumer Products was the manufacturer of Tylenol pills. However, it was under the larger company of Johnson & Johnson, which I'm sure we all know of. Johnson & Johnson immediately issued a recall for all their products, and this included 31 million bottles of Tylenol. And on top of that, they issued refunds and offered replacement bottles of Tylenol. They even issued a reward for any information leading to the arrest of whoever had laced these pills with cyanide. So investigators then set out to try to figure out how these pills had been laced, where they had been laced. They looked at the factories, they looked at the distribution centers, and the thing was that the Tylenol bottles that they were finding all had different lot numbers. So then the leading theory became that somebody had traveled around the Chicago area to different grocery stores and different markets and had put laced Tylenol pills in regular bottles of Tylenol. This was going to be a lot harder to nip in the bud than just, finding whoever had done it at the factory. It could be anywhere. You could randomly pick up a bottle of Tylenol and not know that it had cyanide in it. There was no real way to stop it at the root cause. Police began to take to the streets, blaring over their loudspeakers that taking Tylenol right now could be potentially dangerous and not to take it under any circumstances. All in all, the police recovered 8 laced bottles of extra strength Tylenol. And unfortunately, as news spread around the country of this horrific crime, copycats began to spring up all over the United States. There were over 270 different incidents of copycats, which is just sick and disgusting. People were so shaken up to the point that Halloween candy actually went down in sales by 20% because people just didn't trust other people. They didn't trust their products that they could buy off the shelf. If somebody could tamper with pills, what else could they tamper with? Everything became dangerous. So this crime is actually still unsolved to this day, but the police did find a few suspects along the way. A local bartender came forward to the police saying that he knew that one of his regulars, Roger Arnold, might have something to do with the cyanide poisonings. Evidently, Roger was in the bar just talking about how he was working on a cyanide project. So yeah, the police are gonna look into that. So Arnold admitted to the police that he actually bought cyanide, but it's fine because he returned it before the murders started. So I don't know why you're so worried about it. It's fine. From what I could find, he just played it off. Yeah, and that doesn't mean I did anything. Bitch, you had cyanide. The police searched Arnold's home and they found a few suspicious things, okay? They found a lot of different unregistered weapons. They found a bunch of different laboratory equipment like beakers and vials and a bunch of stuff that you could make some serious shit with, okay? And they found a book that contained the recipe to potassium cyanide in it. That's not suspicious at all. They didn't charge him for anything because the evidence wasn't strong enough. However, he was put behind bars for murdering somebody about 7 months later. So Arnold killed a man because he thought that the man had turned him into the police and led him onto his trail. So he murdered him. And this man didn't say anything to the police. The bartender did, but yet Arnold just decided to kill him and he got sentenced and charged with murder. Arnold ended up serving 30 years in prison. The most popular and likely suspect in this case is a man named James Lewis. Lewis wrote a letter to Johnson & Johnson saying that if they didn't give him $1 million, he was going to keep poisoning people. Additionally, they couldn't find any travel receipts or video evidence of him traveling through or around the Chicago area at the time. Lewis had kind of a sketchy past, so I can understand why the police did decide to look into him. Just the year before, he had been charged with many different counts of mail fraud, and before that, he was under investigation for the murder of one of his clients. In 1978, police found the remains of one of Lewis's clients in his attic. So yeah, it kind of seems like he did it. However, when the police searched Lewis's house, they didn't have the proper warrants, so Lewis basically got off for murder on a technicality. So with this whole ransom note thing, it came out that Lewis didn't even want the money for himself. He put the bank account number of his wife's former employer because he wanted to get back at the former employer and make him look bad. Which is kind of weird. I don't know why you would go through all of that just to get back at somebody. Either way, Lewis was charged with extortion for this little stunt and was charged 20 years in prison, which he only served 13 of those years. So it's kind of crazy because in 2009, the FBI and Chicago investigators actually renewed this case because they wanted to look at it with a fresh set of eyes and see if they could gain any more information. They combed through all of Lewis's computers and different kinds of evidence, but they didn't really find anything that was too incriminating. That same year, Lewis actually released a self-published novel called Poison, The Doctor's Dilemma. And I wouldn't recommend reading it. I haven't myself, but I do not want to give him any of my money, so I would recommend just don't. Trash human. Lewis actually recently passed away just in July of 2023. So Johnson & Johnson finished cleaning up the whole Tylenol poisoning mess, and they then worked on being proactive and putting different safety measures in place, and most of these we still use today. Johnson & Johnson worked with the FDA to create these little foil pull tabs that we see today that protect the top of the bottle, and it makes it tamper-proof. In 1989, the FDA actually made this a safety standard for many consumer products that we have today. Johnson & Johnson also modified their gel-based capsule so it was still easy to take, but it was less easy to tamper with. Unlike the old capsules, these couldn't really be opened in any way, and this prevented tampering of any kind. And a year after the poisonings, in 1983, Congress passed the Tylenol bill that made tampering with any kind of consumer products a federal crime. I think that it's so important that we know about this story because it really shaped the way that lots of our consumer products are today. All of the baby proof, the safety seal, the different kinds of capsules, those all make it safer for us. And it's so unfortunate and so sad that we had to learn our lesson in this way through so many deaths and things like that, but it's a good story to know. And it's a cautionary tale. This is like my little recap. I didn't want to really put it in the story itself, but a lot of people think that James Lewis is to blame for the Tylenol poisonings. A lot of people, for example, Helen Jensen, the public health official, she does think that he was most likely the person that committed the crime, but it's kind of up in the air. It's all unsolved, but I just thought we should cover this story because it's super important. But yeah, that is all I have for you guys. I hope that you enjoyed today's video. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Get outside, enjoy the sunshine, and I will talk to you guys later, okay? Keep being the bad bitches that you are. Bye, guys.